What if I told you, you're not afraid of being alone? You're afraid of the silence that speaks louder than the crowd. You're afraid of the voice that whispers when all distractions are gone. You don't fear loneliness, you fear meeting the real you. In this video, we will confront the real enemy that thrives in your solitude. Not the absence of others, but the absence of lies. We'll uncover why facing yourself is the most painful, but necessary, step to transformation, power, and truth. Stay with me, this might hurt, but it will wake you up. You say you're scared of being alone. That's the story you repeat. That's what you tell your friends when the weekend feels empty, or when no one's texting you back. You reach for your phone, you open the app, you scroll, you tap, you swipe again and again, until the silence is buried deep beneath distraction. But here's the truth you refuse to acknowledge. It's not loneliness you fear. It's exposure, the raw, unfiltered exposure to the person you truly are when no one's watching. Loneliness is a mirror, and when everything is stripped away, no audience, no validation, no applause, you're left face with the reality you've spent your whole life avoiding, yourself. And that is what terrifies you. You weren't born with this fear. It was taught to you, slowly, systematically. You grew up in a world that handed you roles before you had a name. Be successful, be liked, be loud, be important, and if you can't be those things, at least be busy. You were taught that your value depends on what others think. So, naturally, you ran to them. You learned to perform, to wear masks, to smile when it hurts, to speak when you had nothing to say, to laugh at jokes you didn't find funny, just so you wouldn't be left out. And when the room emptied and the screens turned off, there was that uncomfortable stillness. And in that stillness, you heard a voice, a small, trembling voice that asked, "Who am I?" Really, but instead of answering it, you silenced it. You called a friend, you played a podcast, you drank, you partied, you prayed. Anything to avoid the one confrontation that matters most. Because the longer you sit in solitude, the louder that voice becomes. And that voice doesn't care about your reputation. It doesn't care how successful you appear. It doesn't care how spiritual you act. It knows the truth. It is the truth. You don't fear loneliness. You fear the moment when the mask begins to crack, and there's no one around to believe in the image you've built. You fear being left alone with your guilt, with your lies, with your broken promises to yourself, with the dreams you buried, with cowardice you renamed wisdom, with the truth that despite all your efforts, you still don't know who you are, and worse, you fear that once you find out, you won't like what you see, because that mirror in solitude doesn't flatter you. It doesn't edit. It doesn't filter. It shows you what's behind the performance. It shows you the jealousy you pretend isn't there, the bitterness you mask with boundaries, the laziness you rebrand as waiting on the right moment. It shows you how much of your life is a defense mechanism. See, loneliness doesn't lie. It doesn't let you hide. It drags your unresolved pain to the surface. It exposes your need for constant attention. It shows how terrified you are of not being seen because you've never learned how to see yourself. But here's the part that's even more cruel. Most of the people you envy, the ones you follow, the ones who look so confident, they fear the same thing. They can't be alone with themselves either. They fill their days with achievements and validation because the silence reveals a brutal fact they can't bear, that they've built an empire around avoiding the truth. They're not strong, they're distracted. And now you wonder why you feel empty when you're finally alone. It's not because there's nothing there. It's because everything you've hidden starts to come alive. That's what silence does. It summons the ghosts. The voice of the father who never praised you, the betrayal you never healed from, the dreams you traded for convenience, the person you might have become, if you had only dared to stop running. But running is easier, isn't it? It's easier to blame loneliness, to say, I just need more friends. I just need someone who understands me. I just need a good church, a good leader, a good therapist, a good job. No, you need courage. Courage to sit in the stillness. Courage to look in that mirror and say, yes, this is me, flawed, conflicted, unfinished, but real. Because until you do that, until you face the person you are in the dark, You'll never become the person you're supposed to be in the light. And yet, most will never go that far. They'll keep escaping, calling it growth. They'll keep posting, calling it expression. They'll keep performing, calling it purpose. But not you, because if you're still listening, then deep down you know. Silence isn't your enemy. It's the only thing that's ever told you the truth. You were never taught how to be alone. Not once did they show you how to sit still and search the depths of your own soul. Not once did they hand you silence and say, "Here, face it, own it." Instead, they gave you distractions, polished, endless, seductive. From the moment you could walk, you were handed screens, cartoons, noise, movement, constant stimulation. And as you got older, they didn't take it away. They gave you more options, more platforms, more reasons to never pause, to never breathe, to never look within. You think you're making choices, but you're not. You're obeying patterns that were fed to you since childhood. Patterns designed to keep you busy, not conscious. Entertained, not enlightened. You were trained to escape, not reflected. Trained to chase, consume, react. Never to ask, "Why am I doing this?" Never to question, "What am I becoming?" Because if you ever slowed down long enough to ask those questions, you'd realize the terrifying truth. The life you're living may not even be yours. It's a script written by others' parents who told you what success is. Teachers who told you what's acceptable, influencers who tell you what's valuable, and algorithms that whisper what to believe. They fed you idols, wealth, status, romance, comfort, and you built your life chasing them. Not because they fulfilled you, but because you feared what would happen if you stopped. They gave you fast food for the soul, cheap dopamine, temporary highs, click, scroll, like, swipe. Always something new, always something easier than silence, because silence is a confrontation. And the last thing this world wants is for you to confront yourself. They told you to follow your heart, but never taught you how to understand it. They said be yourself. But only if yourself fits the mold. They scream authenticity while selling masks. So here you are, addicted to distraction and calling it normal, filling your day with noise and calling it living, running from moment to moment, crisis to crisis. Also, you don't have to pause and admit you don't know who you are anymore. You see it in your habits. You open your phone before you open your eyes. You seek validation before seeking truth. You talk to be heard, not to understand. You plan your next move before questioning your current one. And worst of all, you measure your worth by how well you perform, not by how deeply you've reflected. This isn't an accident, it's design. Society does not reward self-awareness. It rewards productivity, performance, and obedience. It doesn't care if you're lost, only that you keep moving. It doesn't care if you're broken, only that you look functional. It doesn't care if you're disconnected from your soul as long as you stay connected to the system. So you play along. You build an identity out of trends. You confuse anxiety with ambition. You label rest as laziness. And you surround yourself with people who are just as distracted as you are. Because the last thing you want is to be around someone who sees through it. Because deep down you know reflection exposes you. It asks questions that comfort can't answer. It digs up buried wounds, calls out your excuses, and dares you to admit you've been escaping, and it's not just your screen time, it's your theology, your relationships, even your prayers. You can bow your head, speak eloquent words, and still avoid God. You can be religious, disciplined, even admired, and still use all of it to distract from facing yourself. You think you're spiritual, but what if your rituals are just another form of escape? What if your busyness for God has become your avoidance of God? Because when you stop, when you finally get quiet, you might hear something you don't want to, that your life has been built more on fear than on faith, more on approval than on purpose, and they don't want you to hear that, because a man who reflects is dangerous. He can't be manipulated. He sees the game, he sees the strings, and once you see the strings, you stop dancing. So they drown you in content, make you dependent, tell you that you always need one more thing, one more achievement, one more follower, one more breakthrough. But what if you didn't? What if everything you've been chasing is just a distraction from what really matters? What if the only thing standing between you and power is the courage to stop escaping and finally reflect, Everyone wants to talk about battles. They love the idea of struggle, of war, of conquest. They love to romanticize it. They'll speak for hours about the enemies out there: culture, politics, society, betrayal, pain. They'll talk about overcoming obstacles, climbing ladders, crushing competition, and winning. Always outward, always external, but they never talk about the real war, the one inside, the one you fight in silence, the one where there are no medals, no applause, only scars that no one sees, because here's what they won't tell you: the hardest war you'll ever fight is not with your boss, not with your past, not even with the people who wounded you. The hardest war is the one where you stand face to face with yourself, when the mask comes off, when the lights go out, when there's nothing left to perform, just you naked, flawed, exposed. And most people never win that war. They run, they deflect, they distract. They build empires and careers and social identities just to avoid that confrontation. You see, when you face yourself, there's no one left to blame. You can't say "they hurt me" and end the sentence there. You have to add, "but I chose not to heal." You can't say "life is unfair" without admitting, "and I became bitter instead of brave." You can't say "they abandoned me" without confronting, "and I abandoned myself." And that kind of honesty, it costs more than most people are willing to pay, because it means digging through your own excuses, tearing down the lies you told yourself to survive, and admitting this brutal fact: you were not always the victim. Sometimes you were a coward. Sometimes you were the manipulator. Sometimes you were the one who walked away when you should have stayed. Sometimes you choose comfort over calling. And no amount of success, charisma, or spiritual language can protect you from that truth. It demands everything. That's why people spend their lives avoiding it. They build personas. They become experts in performance. They know how to smile just right, how to post what inspires them, how to say all the right things, but inside, they're hollow, because they've never confronted the parts of themselves they fear the most: the anger, the envy, the lust, the laziness, the need for control, the quiet desperation to be loved, even if it means pretending. They keep those things hidden, buried beneath layers of distraction and denial, but they don't go away. They rot, they grow in the dark, they seep into decisions, they twist relationships, and over time the person becomes a stranger to their own soul. But still they won't face it, because facing it means change, and real change is violent. It kills the old version of you. It dismantles the persona you spent years perfecting. It strips you of every illusion of control. That's why most people settle for transformation in theory. They like to talk about growth, but they don't actually want to change, because change means loss, loss of image, loss of convenience, loss of the narrative you've been using to shield yourself from responsibility. They'll say things like, "I'm just trying to find myself," but they're lying. They know where they are. They just don't like what they see. So they distract themselves with 1,000 goals, projects, relationships, callings, anything to stay busy, because busyness feels like progress, but it's just another way to avoid the mirror. You want to talk about courage? Don't show me your ambition. Don't show me your followers, your success, your discipline. Show me the man who sits in the quiet, alone, and says, "There are things in me that must die." Show me the woman who says, "I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of what I might see if I stop pretending." That's the real battle. It doesn't happen on stages. It doesn't happen in front of cameras. It happens in the dark, in moments where you choose to stop lying to yourself, in the stillness where you finally feel the weight of what you've become, in the silence that demands confession, not to others but to yourself. It's a savage kind of war, because the enemy is familiar. It knows your weaknesses. It speaks in your voice. It knows how to justify every sin, how to spin every selfish decision into something noble. It knows how to make you feel spiritual while keeping you blind. And the only way to win is to stop negotiating, to stop asking for comfort, to stop trying to save the version of yourself that was built on survival, to look into your own eyes and say, "You're not who you say you are, but you can become more." If you're willing to die to this, that's the battle. They call solitude a punishment. You misbehave in society, they isolate you. You break the rules in prison, they lock you in solitary. You speak too much truth, they exile you. Why? Because even the world understands solitude is powerful, but most people misunderstand that power. They think solitude is just being alone. They think it's quiet nights and empty rooms. They confuse it with loneliness, as if presence can only be validated by noise. They've never tasted real solitude. They've never sat in silence long enough to let the dust settle, long enough for the noise to die, long enough to meet the person hiding beneath the persona. Because here's the truth. Solitude doesn't make you, it reveals you, and then it offers you a choice. You can either keep hiding behind the image, the curated, careful version of yourself that you show the world, or you can begin the savage, slow process of transformation. The world doesn't want you to get still. Stillness leads to clarity. Clarity leads to self-awareness, and self-awareness, that's a threat to the system, because the moment you become aware, fully, ruthlessly aware of who you are, you begin to change, not superficially, not motivationally, not the change they sell in books and online courses, but change that costs you, change that fractures everything false you've built your identity on. Solitude isn't for the weak. It isn't for the noisy. It isn't for those who depend on others to tell them who they are. Solitude is a fire. You don't enter it and remain the same. It burns away everything that isn't real. It exposes your motives. It questions your dreams. It tests your convictions, and it does it without mercy. It doesn't care what title you hold. It doesn't care how spiritual you appear. It doesn't care about your following, your influence, your so-called impact. It asks only one thing. Are you ready to confront the unedited version of yourself? Because if you're not, leave. Go back to the noise. Go back to pretending. Go back to posting about growth while staying the same. But if you're ready, step in, and be warned, you will not be celebrated here. No one will applaud your solitude. There is no one to impress in the wilderness. That's why it's sacred. Because it strips you of your audience. It removes the temptation to perform. It silences the need to explain, to defend, to justify. You are left with nothing but the truth, and the truth is, you are not yet who you pretend to be. You've carried wounds you never faced. You've worn convictions that never came from conviction. You've chased dreams that weren't yours. You've avoided your calling because it demanded too much pain. You've chosen comfort over purpose, noise over clarity, admiration over authenticity. And solitude doesn't let that stand. It pulls the curtain back. It shows you your weakness. It reminds you of your cowardice. But it also shows you something else, something terrifying and beautiful, your potential. Not the sugar-coated version you sell to the world, but the real kind, the kind that costs everything, the kind that demands death before it offers life. Because transformation doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with mourning. Mourning of who you were, of who you pretended to be, of the identities you clung to because they were safe. And you can only mourn like that in solitude. That's where the shedding begins. That's where you stop asking, how do I look? And start asking, who am I becoming? It's where you learn to tell yourself the truth without needing applause. It's where you hear the voice you've silenced for years, the voice that says you were made for more, but not this version of you. Solitude is violent because it destroys what's false, but it is also holy because it prepares the soil for what's true. No one will walk that path with you, not really. They can advise, encourage, even walk beside you for a time, but the deeper you go, the more alone it gets. And that's how you know you're doing it right, because transformation is personal. It's not a group project. It's not built in conference rooms or comment sections. It's built in silence, in prayer, in long nights of wrestling with yourself, in staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. with no one to blame but you, in facing the voice that says this must change, or you'll stay a slave forever. Most avoid that voice because it doesn't flatter. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't promise comfort. It only promises this: if you have the courage to endure solitude, you will never be ruled by the false again. And now you understand. It was never loneliness you feared. It was the silence, the stillness, the mirror. Because in that mirror, stripped of distraction, without the comfort of performance, you finally come face to face with the one enemy you cannot escape, yourself. And that confrontation is not gentle. It is violent. It is sacred. It is necessary. You were trained to flee from solitude, to numb reflection with pleasure, to wear masks and call them identity. But deep inside, a voice remains, untouched, unbroken. It whispers, even now, you were not made to run, you were made to transform, but only the honest are transformed, only the still are refined, only those who dare to enter the wilderness alone, without applause, without excuse, will emerge with fire in their bones. So the choice stands before you. Keep running, keep distracting, keep polishing the version of you that dies a little more every day, or stop, turn, face what you've been avoiding, and walk into the solitude where the real work begins. Because until you do, you will keep calling fear wisdom, numbness peace and comfort. Freedom, but it's not. Freedom begins at the moment you face yourself and refuse to look away.